Okay, good morning, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Roxanne Harper. I'm originally from Yellowground First Nation, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be your facilitator here this morning. The topic of converting housing tenure, and the first thing that I want to tell you, though, this presentation takes into consideration that we're looking primarily at the Section 95 units that may already be amortized. I would remind you that the issue of converting housing tenure could actually be a process that you use also with band-owned units if you're interested in changing the tenure of those homes. Housing tenure, the word, a lot of people ask me, what does that mean? And basically the word tenure refers to the arrangement to occupy a home or a property. The tenure will either be one of these three things. So a home could start off as a rental unit, a home could start off as a rent-to-own unit, or a home ownership unit. And it can also evolve from rental to rent-to-own to home ownership, or straight rental to home ownership. Because tenure refers to the ownership and obligation of the property, it means those responsibilities need to be defined. Tenure must be planned and managed according to an approved housing policy, which of course should define the ownership and the obligations. And I can tell you that we developed a two-day workshop on this topic because so many First Nations across the country were beginning to contact us at Turtle Island Associates and say, can you assist us with developing a plan on the amortized Section 95 homes? And I would say, well, what's the plan? And they would say, well, we don't know, but the mortgages are up. So I said, well, you have to think about what does that mean to your community? And it could mean one of several things. But in the last 5 years, we started getting a lot of inquiries about this topic. And then we decided about, I guess it was last fall, to launch a two-day workshop on the topic of converting housing tenure and what would that mean in a First Nation community. So when the planning committee of the conference invited me here this year and asked if I would speak about this, I was wildly excited because I think this is something that is already happening on reserve, but it's not always being planned. And I would encourage all of us to slow down the process and to think about what we're doing as we're changing tenure of existing properties out there today. When we convert the housing tenure, it means that we are changing the responsibilities for all parties. So for instance, if we were taking an existing rental unit now, and an existing rental property is a home that is owned by the First Nation and managed by the First Nation, a band member who's living in that home is our tenant. We have a legal relationship with them as a landlord and a tenant. If we choose to change that relationship where we graduate the tenant from a regular rental unit into a tenant in a rent-to-own unit, that means that the obligations of the tenant is changing because we plan in the future for that band member to become a homeowner. So we're taking the time to invest in that band member so that they are ready to accept the responsibilities of a future homeowner. And if you choose to do this, you need to plan it, you need to think about it, and you need to be honest about, are both parties ready? Meaning, are we the First Nation ready to begin to reduce the size of our rental housing portfolio? And are our band members ready to accept increased responsibilities? Some First Nations are also looking at changing the tenure of the existing rental units straight to home ownership. We're seeing this primarily in communities where the portfolio is older. If it's a Section 95 portfolio, the homes are generally unencumbered or paid off. That means the mortgage no longer exists. We're also seeing some First Nations who are doing it with band-owned units as well. The homes tend to be older with no financial obligations left owing in the band's name. Some First Nations are taking those band members and saying, you're going straight from rental to home ownership, meaning we have a chance to change the relationship. So the occupant now becomes the owner of the property and now has a different responsibility. We're also seeing a lot of tenants who had a rent-to-own option graduating into what home ownership actually means. All of these are viable and possible types of tenure conversions, and each of them should be planned and managed and monitored to ensure that it's the right thing for both the community and for the band member who's actually finding out that their obligations are changing as well. You might be wondering, why would a First Nation consider doing this? And the thing about considering when you would do a tenure conversion is there's a lot of things you have to sit down and think about. If I have 100 rental units and I'm considering taking 25 of them and supporting home ownership, that means I'm now reducing our rental housing portfolio by 25%. Is that really what I want to do? A First Nation has to think about, would we actually do this? Why would we do this? When should we do this? And is this the right approach for my community? And as I've been working with First Nations, I've come to the conclusion that these 4 questions are not so simple to answer. And one of the reasons I got a little concerned, and I guess really one of the reasons that prompted Turtle Island Associates to come out with a 2-day workshop last year, is we were finding a lot of First Nations were understanding these 4 basic questions, and they were immediately just rushing to home ownership because they wanted to get rid of the problem. I'm not convinced that if I take a tenant and graduate them to home ownership that that got rid of the problem. So I started asking bands, what is the problem? And they were saying, well, arrears. People don't want to pay for their houses. People don't want to maintain their houses. We can't afford these houses. So then I started saying, well, if that's the problem, are people ready for your solution? Because if we've got a tenant right now who's not a very good tenant, what makes us think they'll be a very good homeowner? And I have to say, whoa, we need to put the brakes on these things in our communities, and we need to talk about it. We need to be open and honest about it. And we need to support our people in being successful. And if we are going to do tenure conversions, it needs to be for all the right reasons, not just because we're tired of it. Okay, so we have to plan it out and follow a process. So the first thing we started saying to people is, should your First Nation even consider this? It's not for everybody, you know, but there are some common things that we need to be honest about. Right now in your community, do you have, how many people in this room have a Section 95 portfolio where homes are fully amortized? Yeah, so we've got people right now, you need to be having this discussion back home. If they're not fully amortized, many of you have homes which will soon be amortized. And what that means is your CMHC operating agreement will be reaching the end. When you get to the end of that operating agreement, the band has satisfied their obligations, the band has paid off the home, the mortgages are up, the subsidy will also cease to exist. What has not changed is the fact that the band continues to own that home. That is a band-owned asset. It will continue to show up on your asset inventory reports, and you as the owner of the property will continue to have a responsibility to the band-owned asset. So if you have these homes in your community right now, might be a good time to start thinking about the conversion. Does your portfolio back home include band-owned houses where the First Nation continues to pay for insurance, maintenance, and provide services? Many of our bands have an existing portfolio that is not under the CMHC program, but are simply band-owned houses that we've built with our own resources. Those houses are generally, mostly I should say, in the First Nation's name. Some of our bands provide insurance on them. Almost always we pay for the services that go into the home, and many of our communities continue to provide repairs and maintenance on those homes. In some situations, those homes are costing the nation money, yet we're not necessarily generating a revenue on them. Do the occupants or the tenants want to own their home? You know, that sounds like a real simple question, and most people say, oh yeah. But I can tell you in my experience, especially in the last 5 years as I've been working with First Nations to develop home ownership policies, we're actually seeing a trend right now where some tenants are saying, no thanks. Thanks for the offer to own this home, but once you have defined what that means, I'm not interested. That's a lot of responsibility that goes with owning a home if your community develops a home ownership policy and defines what the responsibilities will be. But a lot of our people have tenants right now who want to own the home. Some of them already believe they own the home. And some of them have been promised that that home will be theirs when the mortgages are paid off. If that's the situation, then we need to think, how do we honor what was probably a verbal agreement in many of our communities? How do we honor that? How do we do the right thing now? If your community is interested in supporting qualified members and becoming independent and self-sufficient, then maybe it is time to convert the tenure. And the one word in this whole slide here, the word that's most important to me, is qualified. And I have to tell you, not everybody will be qualified, nor will every property be qualified to be converted. But it is time, at least, to begin the conversation of what this might mean of converting tenure of an existing home. So let me give you an example. One that's probably real to most of us in this room. Here we have a fully amortized Section 95 home. That means the house is paid off, the CMHC operating agreement is up. So now the band is considering taking that home from a rental unit owned by the band and offering home ownership to the band member who's occupying the home. So it's a registered band asset at this point in time. If we transfer it to the band member will become a homeowner. That means the homeowner's responsibilities may increase. We will have to sit down and define, what does home ownership mean in our community? Does a homeowner assume the financial and physical responsibility for the asset? We have to sit down and define what happens to our responsibilities. Most of the time, the homeowner's responsibilities increase and the First Nations decrease. As we no longer own the home, we should have less involvement with the property. So we also no longer have to manage the home if we transfer the ownership. So the homeowner, and here's one of the great things, is if you became a homeowner or you started granting homeownership in the community with the existing portfolio, homeowners have choices they will now make as well. A homeowner could rent out their home. So let's say we had a band member who is a homeowner and they decide that they're going to move to Thunder Bay and go to school and they're going to be out of the community for 2, 3, 4 years. It's their choice to rent out their home to another band member, or to anybody if it's their choice, unless you have a residency bylaw. They could also choose to give their home away. And a lot of First Nations people are attracted to the thought that if I own this home, I can give it to my children or my nephew or my niece. They may also choose to sell the home. They may also choose to make improvements on their home. So a homeowner has certain privileges and certain obligations, and we haven't always promoted that in our community. And while I believe very strongly that home ownership is a viable option for First Nations people, I'm not naive enough to think it's for everybody. I think we have to encourage our people, we have to define the responsibilities, and we have to support our people as they transition from a tenant to a homeowner. And it is something that I believe is worth investing in, especially for your occupants right now who are living in some of the Section 95 units or the band-owned units that no longer have mortgages on them. It might be worth considering. But before you go hog wild, and I say that honestly because a couple of First Nations I've had the privilege of working with didn't consider these things. They just went right to home ownership, probably because the band member said, I was promised this house. I was told if I lived here for 25 years, I would become the homeowner. And I do believe there might have been some misunderstandings that have happened in the past. There may have even been some of these verbal agreements that existed. And in some cases, First Nations just said, let's make it happen. You are now a homeowner. And they found out the hard way that they should have slowed down the process, they should have defined roles and responsibilities, and they should have invested the time and energy in encouraging their people as to what was the best tenure for that individual member. So some things that we should always think about when it comes to converting the tenure is, would the First Nation first think? And I guess, you could do this with an existing home, you could do this with a brand new home, and it probably works better with a brand new home if we were planning a tenure conversion right from the very beginning, is that I would say, and let's use Grace as my tenant again, I would say to Grace, before we will consider any other tenure besides rental housing, we would like you to occupy this rental unit for a trial period of 3 to 5 years. And in that 3 to 5 years, you will be a successful tenant. You will accept all of the responsibilities as per the rental housing policy and your rental agreement. So what could some of those responsibilities be? Anybody want to give me a shout out for what's one responsibility we'd want Grace to accept successfully for the first 3 to 5 years? Minor renovations. Well, you know what, now I'm going to have to challenge you a little bit on that. Do I really want a tenant renovating a home they don't own? So let's change renovations to what? Maintenance. Let's say to Grace, you will have the responsibility of performing basic home maintenance. And as a property manager, I might even want to define what that means. So maybe I make a list of basic home maintenance responsibilities that she is going to be responsible for. Now, I've given them to Grace as her responsibility. Me as the landlord, I now need to monitor to make sure she's able to accept those responsibilities. But what other responsibility could I give Grace over the first 3 to 5 years? What is it? I heard someone whisper. You know it. It's that dirty 4-letter word on reserve. Rent! Rent, work, you know, all those damn 4-letter words, eh? But the reality is if in my rental housing program, I say that tenants will make a rental payment, I can say to Grace, before you get the option to own added to your tenancy agreement, you will be a successful tenant. You will make every monthly rental payment as required. Failure to do so is an indication to us that you are not ready for the rent-to-own obligations. So I can expect certain behaviors over that 3 to 5 years. And I can also say to Grace that if she does not accept those responsibilities, then we will not amend the tenancy agreement to include that option to own. It works really well with brand new projects. With some of your existing projects now, your tenants may say, I'm not interested in renting the home for another 3 to 5 years. I've been here for 25 years. I want ownership right now. And I hear that a lot, and part of me even understands why the band member would say that. So I would suggest before we go hog wild, maybe what we say to the band member is, what about we give you a trial period for 1 year so you can see what it means to be a homeowner? So in this case, I would say to Grace, here's the homeownership policy. We want you to accept all of these responsibilities for 1 year so you know what you're getting into. So I don't officially make her a homeowner yet, but I transfer all the responsibilities of owning that home. In theory, but not on paper yet. So I say to Grace, the band has been paying $600 a year to insure the property. You will have to pay $600 a year for home insurance. The band has been spending X amount of dollars on maintenance and repairs. You will now be billed for any maintenance and repairs that we do to this home over the next 12 months. And some First Nations are choosing at this time when they grant home ownership to also transfer the responsibility for things like water, sewer, and garbage pickup. So I might say, Grace, you are now responsible for a $100 a month service fee for your water, sewer, garbage pickup, whatever that amount is. I could transfer that to her for 1 year. After 1 year, I would meet with Grace again and say, so what do you think? Do you want to do this for the rest of your life? Because that's what we're talking. If my home ownership policy changed the relationship between me and the tenant, because she's now a homeowner, and if I expect homeowners to be self-sufficient, Grace needs to know how much that's going to cost. So I'm giving her 1 year to practice. She might say at the end of that year, no thanks. And that means we as the First Nation, we got a new issue or a new question to ask. If Grace does not want to accept home ownership of this unit, what do we do? Do we continue to offer her rental accommodations at the same rate we were offering the house for the first 25 years? Maybe, maybe not. You know, some First Nations at that point in time would give Grace a choice of signing a new rental agreement. You might also choose to change the rental rates or the responsibilities. And some First Nations will also say to the tenant, if you don't want to sign a new rental agreement, then you will be choosing to vacate the unit. It's about how we manage our assets at this point in time. But if Grace does accept to be a homeowner, for her to do that, there needs to be a home ownership policy. Now, how many of you in this room have a home ownership policy? It should. You know what? Because that's a whole other workshop we could do on privately owned homes. It's a little bit saddened to me that I don't see every hand in this room raised, because I'd be willing to bet all of you believe there's some form of ownership on reserve. You need to have a home ownership policy, whether that's for brand new housing starts, whether it's for existing homes that we're converting, or whether it's for those privately owned homes right now that a band member can build in our own community. We need to have some type of a policy to protect both the homeowner and the community if something should happen. So I would have to give Grace a copy of the home ownership policy and say, are you ready for these responsibilities? And I can tell you right now, there's no need to convert the housing tenure if you don't change the relationship. And a lot of First Nations are making this mistake right now, and I will be so bold as to say I think it's a mistake, is they're taking tenants in the Section 95 units when the home is paid off and saying, hey, you're a homeowner. But now the band continues to provide maintenance and repairs, and the band member continues to show up at the housing department saying, I need this, I need that, I need this. If you continue to manage the relationship that way, you have not changed the tenure. If you're going to change the tenure, you change the relationship. Because housing tenure refers to ownership and obligations. So before people can accept a new housing tenure, you have a responsibility to tell them what it means. So I have to sit down with Grace and I have to say to Grace, here's what being a homeowner means. I think I would also say to Grace that when we do the whole 2-day workshop, we include a couple of resources that would be of great interest to some of you in this room. One of those resources is where I, as the property manager or the landlord of this rental unit, would go back through my housing files, and I would look at probably the last 3 to 5 years, and I would say to Grace, on average, the band has spent this much money on maintenance and repairs for your home, for the home that you've been renting. When you become a homeowner, that is your responsibility. And I would actually run the numbers for the last 3 to 5 years, and every year I would tell her this. Why? Because I'm not going to be there in year 27 when something goes wrong, unless my home ownership policy allows me to sell my fee-for-services back to the homeowners, and maybe I would do that. You know, if Grace calls me up in year 27 and says my toilet's plugged, I might say to her, well, Grace, as a homeowner, you have a choice. You can either hire us through the housing department to come out and we will unclog the toilet. It's a $75 service call, or as a homeowner, you can call a plumber off reserve. That's your choice. But I will no longer be providing the services to my homeowners that I do to the band-owned units. So she has to be understanding that that is changing. Sometimes we don't think about, and this is kind of a big question too, is do we really want to get rid of these rental units? You know, and sometimes I'll ask that question to chief and council and they'll say, absolutely, these houses are a pain. They're a big headache to us. We can't afford them. But I have to force you to think beyond the house, because it's also earlier this morning, those that were here when we talked about the true cost of housing, the issue of land came up. You have to start thinking about your land base and how we're accessing the land base. So those 4 houses that are built over there, they might all be unencumbered, meaning we could convert the tenure, but maybe the band needs to retain that land for something else. We have to start to think through the big picture here. If we grant all of these homes as home ownership, what does that look like in our community? Just because you convert tenure doesn't mean there isn't a need for rental housing. And you have to remember that once you convert the tenure, that house is, for all intents and purposes, out of your residential housing portfolio permanently, unless you're able to get it back at a later date, which some bands might be able to do. But you have to assume that that unit is gone now. And maybe you don't want to convert home ownership. So you'll need to have a land tenure in place that supports this as well. We talked earlier about if a person's going to become a homeowner, they're going to want some type of a land tenure, whether that's a certificate of possession, though in my experience, most First Nations are backing off from certificate of possessions. A lot of First Nations are using land leases, or they're just giving out a certificate of occupancy a certificate of ownership for just the house. But most homeowners want some type of a land tenure so that they have assurances that they can do something with the property into the future. You also have to be honest, does every tenant qualify for homeownership? And I will tell you right now, a lot of us have had really bad tenants. So what makes you think they'll be good homeowners? If Grace has been a tenant living in our housing program and has never accepted her responsibilities, and I'm considering converting Tenure just because I'm tired of Grace, I will probably be setting her up to fail. And if we do that in our communities, I say shame on us. Our job in housing is to support our people to be successful, to make sure that the tenants are ready for the obligations of becoming a homeowner, and to make sure that they have the resources they need behind them to be successful. So we have to ask the question of, are they ready? And not all of them will be ready. As a matter of fact, I'm actually seeing a trend where after all of the tenant counseling has taken place and all of the explanations are provided to the tenants and the review of the homeownership policy is done, there are some people who are saying, no, thank you. I would prefer to continue to be a tenant living in a band-owned house. And you know what? That's okay. There's nothing wrong with them refusing ownership. But what it means for you as the housing provider, you need to now go back and you need to look at your housing operations and you need to say, how will this unit be sustainable? If we have a home that is 25 years old now and we are not granting ownership, we have to plan for the ongoing maintenance and repair and insurance of that home. We have to protect a band-owned asset, which means you need to run an economically viable rental housing program. So it might mean I have to raise the rents on that project and enforce my housing policy so that I can continue to provide suitable, adequate, and affordable housing to my members. But we need to be honest about these things. Can we afford to own it? Can they afford to own it? We have to sit down and think about how much does it cost to insure a property? How much does it cost to maintain a property? And how much does it cost to provide the services to that property? And these are not questions that we should ask lightly. And in my experience, an aging property begins to cost more in terms of maintenance and repairs. We also have to think about what support can the First Nation provide. And when we actually do the 2-day workshop, another resource that is of great interest to the First Nations that attend it is we actually suggest to you that before you grant any tenure conversions where they go from a rental unit to a homeownership unit, you need to say to your band members, so I would say in my case here is Grace, you will be accepting these responsibilities. Here's the housing policy. We recommend you go out and you get an independent legal opinion of what it means to own property on reserve. So here's the housing policy, go and get your own legal opinion. And because I'm such a nice housing person, I would even write into my housing policy that under the rent-to-own program or any conversions that are going from rental to homeownership, the band would reimburse an eligible band member or a tenant in this case up to $200, I'm just making this number up too, by the way, up to $250 for Grace to go out and get an independent legal opinion of what it means to be a homeowner. Now, I wouldn't say go see this lawyer. I would say you just find your own real estate lawyer who can interpret the policy and explain to you what responsibilities you're accepting. And the reason I would invest the $250 in reimbursing this is because I can tell you right now, some of these homeowners are not going to accept their responsibility and they're going to blame it on the band that they did not know what they were getting into. We've already seen it happen at least twice in the country, where First Nations people living in Section 95 units have accepted home ownership when the mortgages are paid off. And in 2 very large First Nation communities, when the new homeowners floundered, they could not afford home ownership, they didn't do maintenance and repairs, and the condition of the asset very quickly began to deteriorate. They blamed the band. And in one case, 6 of the brand new homeowners actually got together and they hired a lawyer, and the lawyer was threatening a class action lawsuit against the band because all 6 of those new homeowners said, nobody told me this. And you know, the great thing about being First Nations, is if we can blame someone else, we will. The problem is we often blame the band office. And we have to prevent that from happening. So I have to assume that my new homeowners might blame the band. And I have to protect the band because that's my job in housing, is to protect the community. So I will be willingly happy to invest $250 for Grace to go out and get a legal opinion. Why? Because when she begins to fail in a year or so, if she does, and she goes to Chief and Counsel and says, Roxanne didn't tell me that, I can say, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Let me show you the process we followed to convert tenure. Let me show you the documentation I have on file. Because don't forget, I have that letter that I've been sending her saying how much her maintenance and repairs cost, how much it cost us to insure it. I have a letter suggesting she get a legal opinion. I even offered to pay for that. We were doing everything we could to help Grace make an informed decision before she became a homeowner. So, and that's my job. My job isn't just to get rid of the units. My job is to help our people become successful. So in that particular case, I would slow down the process and invest an awful lot of time in the counseling and the education that is required for a First Nations person to become a successful homeowner. Why? Because I want her to be successful. I do not want her coming back to me and applying for another rental unit. I do not want her coming back to me and surrendering that unit back to the band or trying to. But most of all, I do not want Grace living in a home that is unsafe for her because she wasn't willing to invest in her own house or was unable to invest in her own house. And when we have this kind of discussion, and I'd be willing to bet some of you are actually thinking about it right now, is what would you do about the people who have been on social assistance for 20 or 25 years? And it's a great question. And I can't say you shouldn't offer them home ownership, because I've seen a lot of successful homeowners who have very little financial resources, but they have a lot of know-how. And they really love their home and they care for it. And they have become successful homeowners. And I've also seen a lot of people with a lot of money not care about the home and destroy the home. So it's not really an income thing where I can say, oh, you don't have enough money to be a homeowner, or oh, you have lots of money, you'd be a great risk. Because that's really not the only factor. That is a factor, but not the only factor. We have to be honest about what does home ownership mean. So 2 hands went up in the room when I asked who had a home ownership policy. For anybody in this room with an amortized Section 95 portfolio and you are considering home ownership, then you need to be working on your home ownership policy right now. What does that mean to your community? And I will argue that the relationship must change. Or you're going to find those homeowners knocking on the door saying, my toilet's plugged, my door's broken. You're also going to find if you just immediately suspend services or immediately suspend the home insurance, something's going to happen. And I worked with a community just last week, and what they've done on their Section 95 units is as the mortgages are paid off and they're offering home ownership, they're saying to the band member, we will continue to insure your house for the next 4 months. You have 4 months to go out and buy your own house insurance. And it's not up to me if you do that. But I'm just telling you that the band's insurance on your house ends on this date, and they send them a letter. So the band member has 4 months to go out and find their own house insurance. And it was kind of funny in that community because they're doing this with their Section 95 units, and their chief last week said to me, I didn't even know where to begin. And I thought, how fascinating. And here's the chief who's willing to say, I'd never bought house insurance in my life, and all of a sudden I have to. And so I asked him, were there any surprises? He said, hell yeah. I was surprised when they told me how much it would cost. And he said, and I went back to the housing department and said, well, can't you just keep insuring my house? And my housing staff said no. And the housing staff said no because they have a very good housing policy, which says homeowners have their own responsibilities. And the band cannot afford to carry the financial burden of homeowners. But the safety net was they gave their new homeowners 4 months to make a decision. So I kind of like a policy like that. I think that's supporting our people in becoming successful. But it's not going to be an easy decision. It's going to challenge a lot of our people. It's not going to be affordable to everybody. And I'm really kind of okay with that because I think you as the housing provider need to prepare for that. So you need to say right now, if people living in these amortized Section 95 units or these older band-owned units, if they do not want to accept home ownership, what will we do? And that's going to be something you need to think about and you need to plan for. If you're going to continue to offer them as rental units, you need to have a budget. You need to have a plan and a strategy to continue to offer a viable rental unit to your members. couple of things that I always feel the need to remind people is when you go back home, you should all look at your existing housing portfolio, both your Section 95 units and any band-owned units that you have. And you know, one of the things that I have certainly seen to be true in my career is most people blame a lot of the housing debt on the Section 95 program. They say, boy, those houses cost us a lot. And I will remind everyone in this room that that is the only program that comes with an ongoing subsidy. And I'm not convinced that they are as much of a financial burden as we believe them to be. I think every home can be a financial burden if we don't manage the tenure. So before you can convert tenure, you must manage the existing tenure. So when you go back home, you need to count every home you have. You need to say, what is the tenure of the existing home? Are they rental units? How many are rent-to-own units? What is the condition of earning that option to own this home? And some of us have made a very big mistake with rent-to-own. We didn't have any conditions. It just said in 25 years, you're going to own this home with no responsibilities other than to occupy it for 25 years. And that, to me, raises a concern that the occupant may not be ready to accept the new responsibilities of a homeowner. You go home, you count your rental units, your rent-to-own units, and guess what? You might already have some private ownership units that you're already providing services to. And what I would do in that case is I would tag them as a home ownership unit and make sure there was a home ownership policy that supported those homes and actually defined what responsibility, if any, the band has. You have to be honest about if converting the tenure is right for your community. Some First Nations are very anxious to get on with it, and they're making it happen right now. Others are slowing down the process, saying, what does this mean to us? Remember, it's not just the house, but it's also the parcel of land of which the house is sitting on. And in one particular community I've been to recently, they have decided that they do not want to convert the units of one particular phase of housing because of the location of those houses. And they have decided that they need to expand a capital project that they have. And they're going to be pushing that capital project much closer to those residential properties than they ever thought they would before. So they're thinking those homes need to stay a rental unit because a lot of homeowners may not like having the capital project in their backyard. So they're saying it wouldn't be fair to offer them home ownership if we're drastically altering the landscape like that. And it's a big capital project that they got to push through, so they got to think about these kind of things now. You have to start planning the conversions. And really, if this was a Section 95 unit, for me, because I'm a planner, I love planning, I would plan the conversion even before I built the house. If I was developing that parcel of our reserve right now, I would say, what kind of houses are we putting over there? Are they going to be strictly rental? Because there will be some homes in our community that should always stay rental. And there will be the need for some homes to go rent to own or home ownership. So if I'm pushing in a brand new project, I might say, let's start that project off as a rent to own project right from day one. So because it's going to be rent to own, we're looking for certain skills and abilities from the applicants. So we're going to go out there and we're going to target a certain demographic in our community who can accept those responsibilities from day one. And if they fail to honor those responsibilities, we will either remove the option to own or remove the tenant from that unit. So you need to plan this right from the very beginning. For those of you with an existing portfolio, start tomorrow. Well, maybe Monday. I'll give you at least until Monday. You know? That's the best time to plan a conversion. It's family day. You know, it affects the whole family. It affects my family too, and your family, so we should start planning. But what you could do is, let's say you do an inventory of your portfolio, and the great example is the Section 95 units. For any units that are entering in their 19th or 20th year, you need to start the conversation. So the first thing you need to do is develop a homeownership policy that defines what homeowners would be responsible for, and you need to start talking to those tenants to say, are you interested in becoming a homeowner? Here's what that means. Again, I would send those letters once a year reminding them how much money the band has spent on that house and reminding them that this is their obligation. So we start the planning process right away. We need to start identifying budgets that would support a tenure conversion. For those of you with your Section 95 portfolio, fingers crossed that your replacement reserves are fully funded, because this will be where we now hit the replacement reserve to make sure we've done anything that we can to that house that's an eligible item under the replacement reserve fund, so that we know the day we convert the tenure and the band member becomes a homeowner, we know the absolute condition of that home was the best we could afford it to be. And I would argue on that point, as property managers, you need to be funding replacement reserves for all properties and maintaining those properties so that the end of 25 years isn't a surprise. Because not all surprises are good, right? Sometimes the surprise is not so good. So you could start planning out those conversions, getting a budget in place. You know you're probably going to have to do some repairs. You might budget, like I suggested earlier, we would reimburse a band member who went out and got a legal opinion. Now, put a limit on that, of course. You know, and I suggested $250. I don't know if that's realistic or not, but I certainly wouldn't allow my band member to go crazy with getting a legal opinion. So I would just maybe call a couple of lawyers off reserve and say, what do you charge for an hour of your time on real estate law? I would also budget to have community meetings and budget to develop my housing policies. All of these things cost a lot of money and do not happen on their own. They all have to be planned for, and they all have to be budgeted for. I would develop eligibility criteria for both the property and the occupant. Not all properties should be eligible for a tenure conversion. You know, I've not yet seen, and I won't say I never will see this because I probably will someday, or some of you in this room may see it, but there will come a time in our communities too when multiple units become privately owned. You know, we might see a condominium on reserve someday. You know, it will happen. It may be unbelievable for us today, but these types of things are, we're just on the cusp of so many things happening in our community that we have to think about the potential, which means we should look at our projects and say, is that an eligible project? You may choose it not to be. You might say that fourplex is always going to be a rental project for us. Some First Nations use their multiples as like a training opportunity for brand new tenants. Say you become a tenant in there and you're really successful, then we move you into a single family 3-bedroom house where you get a rent to own option. So you have to define the property, is it eligible, and the occupant if they're eligible. And in terms of the occupant being eligible, a lot of First Nations are saying to me that they want to put a condition on the tenant, not just them being able to accept the responsibility, but they want to see a residency requirement too. So they want to say to Grace that Grace has to have been a successful tenant and had occupied that home for a minimum amount of time. I'm usually seeing 10 years because Grace may have just come home, moved into her mother's house, and her mother may have been the original tenant for 23 years. So Grace has lived there for 2 years. Does she automatically get home ownership? Some bands are saying yes, some bands are saying no. I'm saying do the math before you decide anything like that, okay? And really think that one through, because there may be very little financial gain for the band to own that house for another 10 years. If she wants to own it, but you got to do the math. And it's not just, you know, we decide off the top of our head. We have to plan that one through and think about it. Pardon me? You might say it's your right, and that's why I said earlier, honestly, my next workshop is tenure talk. We got to start reminding people they are tenants, and we are property managers. We are landlords representing the community. This is a band-owned asset. She might say it's her right, but I will continue to remind her that it's a rental unit, and there are conditions in the housing policy of which she must earn before she becomes a homeowner. I would also clarify how the responsibilities are going to change. Things have to change for a tenure conversion to be successful. If nothing changes, I would argue this is not a successful tenure conversion. If Grace comes back to me in year 26, 27, and I'm still paying for the toilet pump outs, and I'm still, you know, going over there and fixing the door that somehow mysteriously got broken again, then nothing has really changed. So I need to make sure the relationship changes for us. And as I said on one of the first slides, as a homeowner, her responsibilities will increase and the band's responsibilities will decrease. I am responsible for the band-owned assets. I also then will provide support to my occupants both before and after their responsibilities change. So a good housing provider will say to the tenants, if you choose to change your tenure, you will be accepting new responsibilities. We will work with you. We will support you. We will give you the counseling and the advice that we think you will benefit from. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you will be obligated to make these choices. But I will have to make sure that my housing staff can assist the occupants before and after the conversion, because there are many challenges. And you know, even for those of us, like how many people in the room are a homeowner right now? It's not that easy being a homeowner, is it? Sometimes lots of fun, but not always that easy. And since I got a minute, I'll tell you, you know, in October, I was out in British Columbia. I came home, my flight landed at 1:30 in the morning. By the time I got to my house, it was about 2:15. So I walked into my house. The first thing I noticed when I stood in the kitchen, don't ask why I went to the kitchen at 2:15 in the morning, just I did. And the first thing I noticed is my feet got wet. I was like, what the hell? So I turned on all the lights. While I'd been in British Columbia, my dishwasher went haywire. Flooded my house. I thought at first, well, just a small problem. I shut the dishwasher off, cleaned up the water, wasn't overly concerned about it, and I actually even said, wow, I just avoided a huge disaster. A week later, my tiles started to crack. So I called a friend of mine who's kind of a handy person, and she came over and looked at it, and she said, you need to call your insurance company. And I said, what? $17,000 later. Just because I wasn't home when my dishwasher went haywire. Boy, I would have liked to have been able to call a landlord. But when you're a homeowner, there is no landlord. It's just yourself. That's where you want to be grateful that you had protection. I mean, insurance. That's why homeowners buy insurance, because these kind of things happen to every one of us. It never happened to me before, but boy, what a lesson that was. So the moral of that story is, by the way, wash your own damn dishes. Don't be such a fancy Indian that you need a dishwasher. Any questions? There we go. Any questions?
Yeah, actually, I got two.
Okay.
One is if you
Who's asking?
turn the land and the home to the owner, then could that cause problems? For example, then they could sell it to someone who does not belong to the community or the reserve. And the second is, once it's in their name and they put a mortgage on it to buy something else and they forfeit, what happens then?
Well, the first part is you would have to consult your lands policy to see whether or not non-members were allowed to own property. Some First Nations, yes, some no. Okay, so I can't say there's a general answer to that out there. It depends on your lands policies. And you would have to define what that means in each individual community. Okay, would they sell it to another band member? Both ways. In terms of if the homeowner now goes out and borrows money, they're still going to be in a position where on reserve, we still need a loan security. But they may have other resources, and it depends, I guess, you know, if they're only borrowing $20,000, $30,000, they might just get a personal loan. And in that case, if they didn't make their payment, that's with the bank, not with us. So the bank has to do their own due diligence about lending money on reserve. If we lend money, and some First Nations certainly set up their own lending mechanisms for home ownerships, and if you're doing that, you need to be able to secure the loan to make sure that you are going to be repaid. So you might say you're going to give back your land tenure. If it's a CP or a land lease, whatever it is, you surrender it back to the band until that new loan is discharged. That's up to you how you set that one up. But you definitely want to think about it before it happens.
Well, I didn't know if there was any legislation in general about non-members being able to purchase land on community.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I do know one First Nation community, though, that actually allows the sale of land to non-members. Anyone who wants to buy a lot can buy a lot. It's different, but it's their choice, right? You know, but they've designated a parcel of land for that. Garland, did you have a question? Oh, sorry, over here, okay.
It was just on your rent-to-own. You had the three different types of ownerships up there. You had a
Yep.
home ownership, rent-to-own,
And rental.
and your rental.
Yep.
How do you treat your rent-to-own from the beginning? Like, other than the, what was it, 1 to 3 years?
Yep. Yeah,
on
and
your-
it's a great question, and I should tell you, I think rent-to-own is my favorite tenure. I've always been a big fan of a rent-to-own program because it allows me to, right from the beginning, say, I believe you're going to go the distance and you are going to become a homeowner. So bands who offer rent-to-owns, if you start it right off at that tenure, what a lot of bands are doing is they're saying, so how is that different from our rental unit? And one of the things that might be different, it might be, is you might choose a tenant specifically because you want them to go the distance and you're saying, we believe you have the ability to become the homeowner. So right from the very beginning, we might be looking for tenants who can accept this level of financial responsibility and this level of the physical responsibility of maintaining the home. So we expect you to enter the program with that right from day one. Some First Nations have also said to rent-to-owns, we expect you to have something to contribute to this house. So if I'm building a rental unit, I mean, and this is me, I know a lot of you do it differently, but if I was going to build a rental home on reserve today, I would build a house, then I would find the tenant, okay? But if I was going rent to own, I would probably choose my tenant first, and then I might say to these three gentlemen at the front of the room, if they are all approved for the rent to own housing program, I might say to them, there's a maximum amount of money in which we will spend to build this unit. Here are 3 building designs that are all within budget. And I might also work with them to say, you can make this choice, this choice, this choice, all within budget. But if one of them says to me, well, I would rather have this type of flooring than that type of flooring because I am going to be the homeowner, then I would say, well, you have to pay me the difference right now, or maybe within the next couple of days, before we actually change the building specs, because you are now contributing to this unit too. But, and here's where people start to say I'm mean, I would also say to them, if they move out, they're not getting reimbursed for that. That's their contribution to this project. So if they choose to move out or they do not accept the option to own later on, they're not getting compensated for any equity they put into my rent-to-own unit. Because it is technically a band-owned asset. You know, rent-to-own means the First Nation still owns it, but we're training you right from day one to become a homeowner. So you could allow a little bit of flexibility in the building design, the style, but of course within budget. You know, there's no reason to go haywire on that budget. Yep. 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 But, I mean, you still have to protect the unit, right? And this sounds really horrible for me to say this, especially as a housing professional. Every time I build a project or every time I put a tenant in a house, I have to protect that house. So I have to design policies that assume people will not accept their obligation. So if these rent-to-own clients don't go the distance, because life happens, you know, maybe one of these 3 gentlemen gets a job offer and moves to Toronto. Maybe one of them decides they're going to, I don't know, go to another community because their wife's from that community. Or maybe they just decide, you know what, I'm really tired of living here, or I don't like this house after all, or whatever. Or maybe life happens and one of them gets sick and can't accept the responsibilities of homeownership, or they're deceased. That's life, right? We have to design policies that plan for any of those options to happen and to try and protect the band against it. So. Oh, I think Garland first, then at the back, and then Rose.
I was almost ready to give up.
Never, Garland.
You know, this lady has been a part of this housing conference for quite a while, and we also took the opportunity to not only listen to her but to also bring her to Pick River.
That's true.
That is very important for us to all to consider. This coming May, Big River is going to be hosting our 4th year for our annual housing fair. We're not smart. We are a copycat. because a lot of the things we hear here at the Northern Housing Conference, I'm only one of 500 people living in Big River. Unfortunately, that one can carry the message back home. But today we have sort of technology with the cameras that are going on. There are some of our members at home that are actually listening to what's going on. You know, Roxanne told me many years back, "Are you ready?" No, and that, no, I thought I had a good program. No, I got 167 houses at home. And out of that, I got about 120 that's on some kind of rental mortgage. And then in 2017, I'm going to celebrate the transfer of 20 of these units after looking at members paying 25 years at $600 a month. I'm transferred them directly. But I also have a lot of friends that are in the housing business that is warning me that to actually do a home ownership plan, that's a very simple. It's very simple to do, but and as we're getting closer to 2017, the complications are now beginning to wake me up. How ready is that member? How well did our housing program did to help train that member in becoming a homeowner? No, I talk about loss of life, you know, and every day I'm always thinking about that, because I have members at home that went through a lot of loss of life, and then I see the headaches of moving families from the house into another house. How well are they sort of protecting their investment? That's a lot of money. Know that land where the house is. Know that people are afraid to take a plot of land and have it legally surveyed, put a value to it, so and to allow that member to become not only owner of a house, but also owner of that land. You often hear me sort of talking about, remember who you are. Do you know who you are? No, because of your grandchildren and the generations to come. Don't worry about that land. The houses, the land is there for its own sort of protection that will never leave your family if you set up your programs that is sort of geared to families. Now, that's very important to take some time. If you feel something from Roxanne's message, which I am, this is my probably about 3-4 times I'm hearing her, and I'm feeling the same. Damn it, I gotta go and do that. No, go and do it, because it is there for your protection. You know, as a housing manager, I'm responsible to protect not only that member, I'm also there to protect the community and for the generations to come. No, housing is a good business to get into. Don't be afraid of it. It's a very challenging business, and you could protect the future of your children if you take Roxanne and the housing fair home. Duplicate what you see. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Garland.
Thanks, Garland. I think there was another question.
Rose, and I think the gentleman at the back of the room.
Rose?
There's
Oh,
a
you
gentleman
forgot.
right behind you, Grace. Behind you in the corner.
Behind, way behind.
I'm not sure how you asked this question here. When the community has an agreement with this family or community member, let's say they have a 25-year agreement, you know, to eventually own the house after 25 years. Near the end of this 25-year agreement, let's say the 22nd, 23rd year, or is it common for the renter to ask for renovation of the house before the 25 years is up?
Well, I don't know if it's common, but I think it happens all the time. And I think the truth of the matter is that the home, especially if it's a Section 95 unit, you should have had a fully funded replacement reserve. So it's a great opportunity for the band to say, yes, we are going to tap the replacement reserve fund, and we are going to look at what some eligible items are. So yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of that happen. What you have to be careful of, though, is when you manage your tenure, and this goes back to right from day one, we need to manage the property so that when we get to year 23, 24, we're not paying a lot of money for things that should have never happened. And a lot of times, if the occupant hasn't been doing basic home maintenance or hasn't been, preventing costly repairs, we could now be coming back and spending thousands of dollars. So I would be entering, and I did say at the first part of the presentation, for rental units, I would go once a year and check on the unit. If I had a reason to go more often, I probably would until the occupant was accepting their basic home maintenance responsibilities. But your policy needs to enforce that. And I think it's through that type of proactive property management, when we get to year 23, 24, 25, we could say, yeah, there are eligible items now under the replacement reserve that are no fault of the tenants, like windows, doors, roofs, siding. These are things we have money set aside to repair. And that would then certainly give the homeowner a really good start. But you should also remind homeowners that in another 25, 30 years, they're going to be looking at the same type of repairs. So homeowners also have to plan for future repairs. But absolutely, I think it is going to happen. I just want to say that when you go back home and you start this process, because somebody said to me a couple weeks ago, we made a mistake. I think that's life. Every housing coordinator makes a mistake. And I think the only housing manager who doesn't make a mistake is the housing manager who does nothing, who sits around all day saying, oh, geez, what should I do today? The rest of us, as we move forward and we introduce change, like new policies, new procedures, new housing programs, as we begin to convert tenure of the existing portfolio, we make mistakes. We learn from mistakes. You don't have to know all the answers today. What you do need to know today, though, and I am serious about this, you need to know what type of tenure your band offers. You need to go home and you need to look at the existing portfolio and you need to say, are they rental units? Are they rental units with an option to own? Or are they already homeownership units? And you need to develop the policies that support each of those tenures. And then you need to talk that tenure. You need to say to homeowners that homeowners are required and obligated to protect their investment. And you need to remind tenants that they live in a band-owned home. And you need to remember, as a property manager, you are responsible for millions of dollars worth of assets. And that our job is to protect both people and property at the same time. And we protect people by writing policies that are respectful, that support economic sustainability, that no longer reward bad behavior, and that expect more from the occupants. And it's okay to do all of those things in our community. And if you make a mistake, you make a mistake. We learn from it. And that's life. I want to thank all of you for being here with me today. Once again, the Planning Committee, who every year invites me to come back, and I enjoy the opportunity of that. And I want to thank CMHC, who continues to sponsor my participation here. And I see them all in the room, so they're evaluating me. So, make it good, guys. Anyways, I wish you all a great rest of the housing conference. Some of you I've seen recently, and I look forward to seeing all of you again in the near future. And I will say at this point in time, Walalan and Upnamultus. Thank you.
Miigwech. Tansi.
Hold on.
Oh,
I
yeah,
forgot.
hang on.
Oh, you got to be kidding me. Rick, did you tell on me? You got to be. Who ratted me out? Did you have to put the number on too? I would have told you. Thank you. I wish everybody pays rent. Thank you very much. Wow, I don't know. I think only a couple of you in this room knew this. I'm looking at the back there at Rick. I think he's the one who threw me under the bus. Just before I forget, though, I did bring a couple of T-shirts with me. So let's see. Who in the room has anybody in the room already started converting tenure of your existing CMHC units? Yeah, can you tell me what's one lesson you've learned? One lesson, quickly. For who? Who's responsible for it? Excellent. All right, I'm going to give you a prize. I like that lesson. Catch. Whoop. All right, who else can give us a lesson? Before you convert tenure, what's one thing you should do? Have a policy. Why, Rose? All right. Whoops, sorry, Rose. And that's we, the administration, and the occupant also needs to know. Okay, who else? Give me one lesson on converting tenure. One thing we need to do, not to do at the back of the room. What's that? Ah, that's very good. So right now, that tells me from the beginning we need to be tracking what type of work we're doing to the rental units, especially if the tenant's going to become a homeowner. They need to know what this all involves. So here's a proof. That's very good. I can't throw that far. Holy, there's a new career for me. Yay! I'll bring it out to you. How's that? Okay, so that's it. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.